I won't go into all of this except to say that in the end, after doing a very exhaustive search, you can see in red here, oh, maybe you can't see, but what it says is that finally there were 133 prevalence studies in the recent literature, 130 unique reports, and altogether data from 50 countries. So what I'm going to show you is the results of the most recent of those. I'm not going to go into all of the regions and countries, but just to give you a feel for this, this is the data for South America. I'm going to focus a bit on Peru, so that's the second line down. The aggregate prevalence in MSM, the confidence intervals around those figures, the population prevalence in the general population, of which you can see across South America, the rates in general population samples are quite low. Virtually all of them under 1%. And then this ratio of the prevalence in MSM to the general population. And the bottom line for this region of the world is that MSM really are the predominant group at risk for HIV infection. So just to focus in on two important countries where there's reasonable data, here you're looking at Peru and Brazil. And what you can see is the general population prevalences among reproductive age adults happily are quite low in these countries, less than 0.5% in Peru. But among MSM, of course, substantial HIV infections. 13.8% prevalence in Peru among MSM, about 8% in Brazil, and some important taxonomic differences and risk factors. So, this is the region we're talking about, and really across that region, MSM are the principal risk group for HIV infection. So keep that in mind as we go through this, because when we get into the modeling, you'll see that the impact of HIV preventive interventions and of antiviral therapy treatment for MSM in this region really is essential to the response. Without it, there really isn't a response. The second scenario that we looked at, and this again is pulling all the available data, is these injection drug use related epidemics in the former Soviet Union. Here you're looking at data from two important countries, Ukraine and Russia. The general population HIV prevalences are a little bit higher than in South America, but still happily relatively low. Ukraine's is the most severe in the region, 1.6%. prevalence, but in MSM, significantly higher, about 11%, but in injection drug users, about 40%. And of course, the great bulk of injection drug users are men, and there is some overlap between MSM and IDU. Again, that's going to really be important when we look at projecting the impact of interventions, and interventions also for drug users on that epidemic. So that's the region we're talking about, former Soviet Union. The third scenario that we looked at is the epidemics that are emerging in sub-Saharan Africa. And here, of course, there are high rates, unfortunately, of HIV infection among MSM wherever we look in sub-Saharan Africa, but in the context of the world's most severe epidemics generally. And so here are two representative countries, Kenya and Malawi. We'll actually, when we go into the modeling, we'll focus on Kenya. About 6% reproductive age adult prevalence in Kenya. It had been much higher in the past. This is an epidemic that's been coming under fairly steady control, but 15% prevalence in MSM. Malawi, higher general population rates, but about twice that among men who have sex with men. And in both countries, actually, some emerging evidence of interactions between MSM and injection drug users. These are the available data for all the countries from sub-Saharan Africa that fit into this pattern. It used to be on this slide there were only 3 or 4 data points. Now, of course, there are a number of countries emerging here. The MSM prevalences in this column, all unfortunately pretty substantial. For many of these are the first time anybody has done prevalence studies. These are the confidence intervals around those, fairly robust. The population prevalences, of course, are much higher, but generally across the board, what you see is that rates among men who have sex with men are about twice that in the general population samples. So there is, unfortunately, a lot of HIV prevalence, and this is the region we're talking about, sub-Saharan Africa.